Great, thank you. All right. And we will publish this on the on Bill Allison's site as soon as we get access to this. All right, so let me just say a few things about the XR Community of Practice project that we're involved in. So what is it? So it is a changemaker project, and I really want to give my thanks to Bill Allison for funding our effort to develop a community of practice around these extended reality VR, AR technologies on practice. On campus, rather. We really think of this as a community building effort. And one of the things we wanted to kind of uncover are several themes that help really point the way towards some best practices. And we'll unpack those themes in just a little bit. And also because my colleagues, Owen McGrath and I are, we work in the Research, Teaching, and Learning organization, we wanted to understand from a campus perspective, what kind of capabilities and services might be of use to you all on campus as we kind of explore the potential here. So here are the themes that we've been talking about. And hey, by the way, do people see are you seeing the list of floating heads here? Is that in your view as well? I don't know if I can hide that. Can I hide this?
I'm not seeing the list of floating heads on the screen share view.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, great. So our four themes. So, and these are actually a packet of kind of related issues, but accessibility is certainly one. With these kind of specialized technologies that are really designed for embedding people in a visualized environment with surround sound. How can we make sure that these are available to everybody? Some topics that are really near and dear to my heart are curation and interoperability. So how can we make sure that as we're creating these experiences and the content that goes into them, that they are kind of well managed, that they're available, that they can be reused in other experiences, and to the point that we were just discussing with Justin earlier, how can we make sure we can even create this content in the first place? It's a very difficult process at this point. And in terms of interoperability, how can we make sure that all of these play well together? And even just this experience of trying to create, this event today and have things from one experience be part of a Zoom session has been, interesting just in and of itself. And then there are just a series of ethical issues around security and privacy and just access to expensive technology, et cetera, that are also quite relevant, especially on a university campus. So those are kind of the four lenses that we bring in that we'll be using today in today's discussion. All right, so again, thanks really to Bill and to Jen Stringer, our CIO, and Larry Conrad, our predecessor, who helped fund this event. Shauna Dark, the Chief Academic Technology Officer in Research, Teaching, and Learning, has been a big supporter of this. And then really, we're also very happy to share the stage today with 4 projects that are also part of the Changemaker series. And I think we have representatives from all or most of these projects: Pablo Gonzalez, Luisa Caldas, Eric Palos, and Bjorn Hartman. And I think one of the things that's really exciting here is that we're really dealing with a technology that has a lot of diverse applications across campus. So this isn't just about, say, the digital humanities or computer science. It's really something that potentially spans a lot of disciplines. And thanks to all of you who've joined us today. And you've been thought partners, all of you here today, with us as we've worked through some of these interesting issues on campus. So I think several of you may recognize these slides from the Digital Humanities Fair presentation a couple of weeks ago. But this just kind of comes through and talks about what we've been doing in the XR community of practice. And we're looking forward to really hearing your input today on what we can do moving forward. Even as the project theoretically comes to a funded ending, at the end of the year, we're really looking to continue the work in terms of building a community around exploring and improving how we use these technologies responsibly. And then here are our goals for today's event. We want to tell you about this really exciting project that we've been involved in. I'm so happy that that Elaine and Rita have been our PIs on this and have really brought together an interesting project with some interesting potential as well. And we want to really look at this project through these lenses that I mentioned: accessibility, curation, interoperability, and the ethical issues of security and privacy. Owen and I and Alex have been doing some projects, some experiments as well with different technologies to kind of explore what the future of some of these projects might look like, and we'll share some kind of recorded demonstrations of those. And most importantly, we want to talk with you about this project, about your projects, and other ideas for our students, faculty, and staff on campus. Okay, so that is, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and come back, and that's just kind of the general introduction to the XR community of practice and what we'd like to accomplish today. Owen or Alex, do you have any other points, or Elaine or Rita, that you'd like to share before we kind of jump into the demonstration of the Return to the Tomb experience?
I think you did a great job, Chris, of introducing it. It's probably obvious, but I think we can step back and say that we had hoped to be much more active as a community of practice, but the pandemic has obviously sidetracked our efforts. It's exciting now to be thinking about a return to campus, instruction starting to look a little bit more normal in the fall. And I think Chris and I see today as kind of a soft launch, working with you as a cohort of people doing a lot of exciting work on the cutting edge for Berkeley. And so we really do want to leave time today to hear about what would benefit you. How could a community of practice support you in your research, teaching, and learning efforts?
Yes, Chris, and I think this was a great introduction, so I have nothing to add for now, but I'm looking forward to the discussion at the end.
Excellent, thank you. Hey, and Alex, can I, we're doing the recording, but maybe you can somewhere take notes about, just make sure we know who all is here, okay?
Yes, definitely.
Thank you, awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And the first part of kind of the next part of the session here is really to do a video demo of the Saqqara VR kind of Return to the Tomb experience, and then have a discussion with the project team, and then and also with you all. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show a video of a presentation that I gave about a year ago to the Immersive Learning Research Network conference. It's called iLearn, and this really it includes mostly a demo of the VR experience itself, as well as has some interviews with different project team members about their role and their observations. So this is a 7-minute video, and I'm going to try to make sure that it's sharing the audio correctly, etc. And then after the video, we'll stop and we'll have some kind of panel discussion and questions, and we'll take up around half an hour for this part, but we'll just see how much time this takes. And we're such a I'm so happy this is actually a nice small intimate group, so we can really have the conversation go in directions that people find helpful. I see a chat from Bill to make people comfortable. Oh, I'm sorry, that's to me directly.
Yeah, all I was going to say was, if we are recording some things to get the word out about this, but I was hesitant to make people feel uncomfortable if there's an open discussion, if they're worried about it being posted online. So I was saying maybe we give the option to turn off the recording when it goes to open discussion.
Oh, that's a great point. Okay. Yeah, so let's revisit that when we get to that point of the kind of the discussion, and see if people would feel more comfortable turning off the recording. We can absolutely do that. That's a great suggestion. Thank you, Bill. All right, so with that, I'm going to share my screen again. Desktop. Share sound. Optimize for video clip. This is the part I got to learn this week. Okay, so hopefully people are seeing a screen that looks like the Immersive Learning Research Network, kind of a title slide. And I'm going to start playing now. Hi, I'm Chris Hoffman from UC Berkeley, and I'm looking forward to describing a project that I've worked on with 2 Egyptologists and a team of students, librarians, and other staff. This project bridges the landscape-level visualizations developed by Dr. Elaine Sullivan of UC Santa Cruz with the object-level visualizations developed by Dr. Rita Lucarelli of UC Berkeley. In this presentation, I will demonstrate the VR experience and reflect on some of the lessons that we've learned. I will intersperse demonstrations of the VR experience with comments from our team. Let's begin with a bird's-eye view above the sacred landscape of ancient Egypt.
Welcome to the ancient Saqqara necropolis. Sakhara was an important cemetery site that stood in the high desert west of the city of Memphis, a religious, economic, and political center. It is the 26th dynasty, otherwise known as the Saite period, 664 to 525 BCE, when high officials and families of the elite from the now state capital Sais.
One of our earliest challenges was repurposing content developed primarily for scholarship and documentation. In addition, these assets were developed using different tools and workflows, complicating their incorporation into a single Unity project. The resolution of landscape models developed in ArcGIS needed to be reduced significantly, and techniques such as LOD, or level of detail, were used so that nearer structures could be rendered in higher resolution than more distant ones. Similarly, the 3D model of the stone sarcophagus was a very high-resolution mesh that used 3 texture files. This needed to be simplified as well. Now let's come back to the VR experience and learn how Egyptians of this period built these royal tombs deep underground.
26 dynasty shaft tombs were often designed with a long, narrow shaft dug into the ground, ending in a burial chamber. Psamtik's tomb shaft extended more than 25 meters deep into the rock of the Saqqara Plateau. After the burial chamber was built and in place, the shaft was filled with sand to make the tomb inaccessible.
The design of this particular scene went through several iterations. Our Egyptologists needed to closely read the original excavation reports, which were originally published in French in 1906. These discussions were exciting to me as we reinterpreted and rediscovered the original spatial contexts of the funerary culture of the late period of ancient Egypt. Certainly one of my most valuable learnings from this effort has been the importance of forming a diverse team comprising faculty, librarians, undergraduate and graduate students, project managers, and other staff. Ours was a wonderfully interdisciplinary and vertical team with a mixture of domain expertise, design skills, and technology skills. And now let's come back to the last scene in the demo and move inside the tomb.
Click on the hieroglyphs to view their translation.
An interesting issue that came up frequently was the tension between the authenticity of the presentation and the usability of the experience. Here to describe one of these negotiations is Reed Scriven, our lead developer.
For quite a while with the lid of the sarcophagus really illustrates that. That's come up in a lot of different scenarios, but that one was just such an obvious example of if you put someone in the tomb where it'd be historically accurate where the top of the sarcophagus is on there. They get claustrophobic. There's not a lot of space to move around. It just didn't quite work, so we had to make a couple of concessions about that. And then
we have had several opportunities to test the experience with others in order to assess what we had developed. While the entire experience was exciting to those wearing the headset, it was usually here inside the tomb where it was obvious that the player felt that they had moved into a very different cultural space. The experience is obviously more immersive when it is at a person's own physical scale. Another powerful finding from our testing sessions was the kinds of support we needed to give to those doing the testing. This reminds us that the majority of people, at least in the audiences we are targeting, have never had a VR headset on. Jess Johnson, a UC Berkeley graduate student studying with Dr. Lucarelli, led this aspect of the testing sessions and developed much of the text that is used in the VR experience.
I know a lot of times when people are in the gym, they don't think they can turn around or that they can bend down or crawl on the floor to go into the other small chamber. So telling them that there's more movability and access than they think is also really interesting.
This effort has given us a taste of what's possible and has motivated Drs. Sullivan and Lucarelli to continue working together on these kinds of immersive visualization experiences. Given that they are already deeply committed to new forms of scholarship using visualization technologies, I am excited to see where they will take this work. Let's hear from them on some next steps and future directions.
And even launch this new trend that indeed you take objects from a museum and you bring them back. We could set some new standards in that direction within the field. It would be really awesome.
I do think that our experiment to move from the bird's eye view above the landscape down to the personal level of an ancient tomb and the sarcophagus inside it has been successful. Bridging the macroscale and microscale is a powerful way to leverage the power of immersive visualization technologies. And I'm excited about the potential for new approaches to storytelling, scholarship, and learning. Thank you for listening and watching. Let's hear once more from our project team.
Thank you for visiting the Tomb of Somtek at Saqqara. We hope you enjoyed your journey.
Okay. Well, there we are with that little movie. Yay, thank you. I'm glad we got to reuse that. That was done a year ago, and it was a heck of a lot of work. It was, I'm sure you've all experienced. Here you go to these conferences that are now flipped, and you're asked to make a movie and then talk briefly about it. And wow, it's a lot of work to actually make a movie of a presentation. So I'm glad I could reuse my content. Wonderful. So now, thank you. Now let's actually have some kind of a discussion about what you've just seen. And I'll ask the project members. So we've got, let's see, we have Rita here, and Elaine, and Reed, and Christy, and Josh, and I hope I'm not forgetting anybody, but please feel free to unmute. And I'm going to ask a general question here and of the project team members, but I'll ask others, just feel free to put questions in chat, or we're small enough that you can just raise your hands and speak up, but we'll have about 15 minutes or so to just have some general discussion. So let me kind of start it off with a question to the project team of like what you would like as you think about kind of the future work along these lines. What would you like to be able to learn from other people here in the room, and what kinds of capabilities would make it easier to do this kind of work in the future? Rita, please.
Thank you. So I would like to learn still a lot of things, actually, because I believe that we need more technical support from campus, and I would like to learn to know more who are the colleagues I can ask help. But my frustration has been, well, luckily we connect with Chris, and Chris has been an amazing manager for our project. But I had no idea how to move on this project at Berkeley, because I'm an Egyptologist, and I know some colleagues at History of Art and History and Classics, but that's it. And I wonder if there is a way instead, when humanists create a project that involves technologies, VR, or we were thinking also to AR later on, if there is a way to connect with colleagues in other fields. So that's my main question, but I don't want to take all the time for the discussion.
Great, thank you. And I see that Justin, you put in this comment, it'd be great if we could formalize a pipeline request system campus-wide for doing photogrammetry and laser scanning. So specifically for creating some of those digital models of this fantastic resources that are available on this campus. Do you want to say more about that, Justin?
No, that's it. That's just, it's, there's a lot of moving parts in different institutions with different resources and constraints. And oftentimes, we have amazing collections on campus, but if you're especially doing this with a team of students, I often focus on public sculptures or works of art to digitize just because access is so much easier.
Aha, right.
And if you're teaching photogrammetry, especially, oftentimes the students are going to have to go back and take a second round of pictures because they're learning. So unless you're there with them, making sure every shot is in focus and whatnot, that adds additional constraints.
That's a great point. And certainly for the photogrammetry work I've done in some of the campus museums, it's all been, done by students. And yes, I very much take that point that, and Alex, you can probably speak to this, how frequently it is that you actually, don't get good results. And ideally you go back and take more photographs, and sometimes you just can't.
Yeah, totally. That's a huge thing. Is sometimes you need to go back and take more. And I think that oftentimes you need to realize that sort of inflection point where you're like, I need to take more now and I don't need to waste any more time with these things. And that's definitely a huge part of it.
Great. Luisa.
Hi. So thanks for this great presentation, Chris. Really nice, great work. And Rita, I wanted to let you know that we are just opposite from you when we go back to campus at Worcester. So I'm a professor of architecture. We have a XR lab over there, and we would love to work with you.
Oh, so thank you so much.
We have a good group of, graduate students, mostly. One of them is here right now, Alnas. But we have a relatively good, large group, and there's a lot there that has to do with architecture, and we would love to work with you.
Thank you so much, Luis. I'll be in touch for sure then.
Great.
Excellent, thank you. Other thoughts or observations? One of the things I'd like to really think about at this point in the discussion is what it's been like to take these digital assets that were originally created for kind of documentation and scholarship purposes, and really kind of high resolution, lots of data, and make them work in a in a VR context. And you heard the quote from Reed in that recording, but I'm wondering if Reed or Christy or any of the others would like to talk maybe about, and Elaine, about some of the interesting work and challenging work to make the landscape models, for instance, available in an appropriate way in the experience. Oh, go ahead, Reed. Yes.
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. And this reminds me about one of the earlier parts of the project that was a huge struggle that we didn't anticipate being such a struggle, which was getting the export correctly from the software Elaine was using for having the landscape with the different time periods and getting that into Unity. I think we ended up documenting that a little bit, but we just had so many hurdles just getting that showing up right. And there were just weeks where we spent a bunch of time exporting, and then it didn't work and we had to do it again. So just the technical aspect of that was really challenging, like kind of bridging between all those different softwares and having it come together.
Yeah, that was a lot of work. Yeah. And honestly, I'll say, you know, we had other students doing that, trying to do that work earlier, and had several, you know, I will just say failed efforts that, and finally Reed really worked through. We found Reed and he was able to really work through some very difficult technical problems. Elaine.
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges with trying to do this content in the academy is that Rita and I are building content for very specific purposes that are about our Egyptological research. And so unlike maybe in gaming where people are building things custom for the VR experience, you know, we're trying to repurpose and reuse data created in archaeological contexts or in a conservation context, and then find ways to port that into these new kinds of programs. And so maybe that's not a challenge that, you know, some gamers or if you start with the idea of building these kinds of programs for a gaming experience or for an educational experience instead of coming from a research experience. So, but I think that's a real a hurdle that we need to address, because the content that we're getting when we're getting it out of a conservation or research origin is going to be amazing, right? It's often directly from the field or the content from our colleagues that if we can get them to share it with us. And so we really want to learn how to take advantage of materials that are coming directly from the field or from other museums, and not rely on building things ourselves in low res for the point of a game, but instead to be able to repurpose and reutilize all of this incredible 3D content that's coming from the world of archaeology.
You know, that's really interesting. As you're saying that, I'm thinking about, you know, that kind of comparison to like the way astronomy happens or something, where the initial content that they're getting is very high resolution. It's very expensive. But from there, they create derivatives that are used for a lot of different purposes. And here there's kind of a similarity in the sense that we're starting with something that's extremely high resolution. And from that, if you do it right, you can really use it for almost any purpose. I see that, Justin, thanks for that thumbs up. Christy.
I think I just wanted to add to that because of the way that the content was coming to us, it meant that existing pipelines sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. So there was a lot of trial and error in there that we tried to account for time-wise, but it's not just trial and error of the technical, but it's also, as you heard Reed say about like what you're actually seeing, it's trial and error of what you're willing to see change in that data when you bring it down to its base components to make it game friendly, and what's really important from an academic standpoint to stay there versus what's data that you could recreate in another way that would make the game engine happier. So it ends up being a mix of two different ways of looking at it, which gets complicated.
That's awesome. Rita.
Yeah, if I may add quickly about the amazing work of the team of UC Santa Cruz with Elaine, who were really the ones who took care of the landscape. They had to base their works on 1900 old excavation report written in French with a lot of jargon, in many places, in many sections, not clear at all. So they had to interpret the whole report at a certain point. Elaine, you remember we had the translation, right? Of I don't remember who did the translation right now, but we translated in English to make it even more clear. And so I think that's amazing. This kind of work, it's not easy at all, and I really appreciated the way you did it.
Yeah, that to me was super exciting to see that. It really felt like, I mean, it was like original scholarship, right? We were going back to the primary literature and rediscovering what the sarcophagus looked like in its original context. That was, and it's not like it was just a single reading and then like, yeah, it was like this. I mean, we actually iterated on that a number of times.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, sorry. One of the things that I've always thought was so incredible about 3D is that when you are faced to ask questions in 3 dimensions, you often learn things that you didn't even realize were questions. And so by actually trying to 3D model this 1901 publication, I think it was Barsanti, Rita, we realized that he just has a 2D drawing and a verbal description of the tomb. And so we realized by trying to 3D model it, there were a lot of things that were unclear to us that we really had to interpret, that we, as Chris said, did in an iterative way until we finally figured out what we thought actually worked with his description. So it is also, it's an interesting opportunity to kind of do interpretation of early Egyptology. And then, you know, we would love in the end to be able to go back to Saqqara and look at the new photogrammetric data that's come out of the recent excavations there and compare our reconstruction and Barsanti's reconstruction and the new photogrammetric materials. And that itself would be a very interesting research paper and scholarship. So this kind of work really is, it's super useful to us as scholars thinking about both early 19th or 20th century, late 19th and early 20th century publication, but also in sort of reinterpreting and understanding spaces that are sometimes inaccessible to us.
Yes, I always talk to like who knows Barsanti, what he would think if he could know how his report has been used.
Excellent. Yeah, and thank goodness that the UC libraries actually have that original publication. We were able to check out and, you know, to take some images of it, right? So also a wonderful resource. I see a great comment here from Dylan. Would love to hear from the team about challenges with accessibility and what solutions they looked at, such as captions and mobility. We are actually going to have a whole next section on the issue of accessibility, but I wonder, good question about, you know, for the project we were doing, to what degree did we even think about accessibility? Christy.
So I will say that we started talking about captioning early on, and that's a thing that we have kind of spent a lot of time talking on early, but determined that we really needed to have a good base project before we integrated some of that. And then the other thing that we thought a lot about was what the viewer's experience was. It's not until you hit that last scene where the viewer has the ability to walk around. In those previous scenes, it's really a stationary experience. And that's, I think in large part was driven to how the experience, we were looking to use it explicitly in kind of a museum setting, but does also help with that mobility, accessibility, access issue. So I think those are the two ways that we were thinking about it, or at least that I know that we did explicitly kind of talk about it from my perspective.
Yeah, actually, I'd be interested in hearing, thank you, Reed, because we did do some actual, you know, some pretty hardcore technical work to try to get the captioning to work. And this will be a really good thing to do as a segue into the next section. Why don't you talk about that, Reed?
Yeah, totally. So as Kirsty was saying, yeah, we from the beginning, we really wanted captions, but we kind of shelved the implementation till later. I think we had a couple different like stabs at it. Olivia Kim joined the project for a bit, and she was trying some implementations, like breaking the text up. Because I think one of the things that really helps with this project is the voiceover Elaine and Daniel recorded. because that really helps give context to the location, and it kind of ties the whole experience together. And so just having that be even more clear. So like even after Elaine finished reading, you could have her read it again, or you could just read the text yourself. I think that was really helpful because that really just added so much that the user could get from the landscape, hearing the context about the different locations, because otherwise you're just there and you're seeing these things. And I mean, one of the problems with VR that AR kind of helps with is you can't have that research paper up at the same time. You're just kind of in it. And unless you're like taking the goggles on and off, it's hard to get the context on the location, even if there's a title for it. Another thing I just want to briefly talk about for accessibility was kind of like playtesting that we did, and kind of the challenges that arose from being kind of split between UC Berkeley and UC Santa Cruz. I think every time we were able to get a good like session in, like with Elaine or Christy or people at DSC or Rita's class demos, when we got to do those, we always got such great feedback from that. And I think that's so in such a little project like this, because kind of like what Chris had in the video earlier about being inside the tomb, there's a lot of design challenges with that. Like if you're standing up versus sitting down inside that, because you go from such a large open space in the landscape to being in a very enclosed small space. How do you get the information to the user without it just breaking? Here, 1 second.
Yeah, that was fascinating. You know, I think one of the, I can't remember, did we actually do this at the very end? We talked about one of the things that Jess Johnson, who's a graduate student studying with Rita Lucarelli, she designed kind of an orientation for how to do the VR experience, which is available off the kind of the splash screen in the beginning of the experience. And we were going to just take the text that Elaine and Rita wrote, and Elaine, and we were just going to like have that on a screen. I can't remember if we actually were able to build that in at the end. Do you remember, Reed?
What was that question again? Sorry, Chris.
Oh, sorry. I know you had something going on there. Yeah. I remember that in terms of accessibility, we were also going to take the text that Elaine read and just put it like as something you could bring up from the splash screen. I can't remember if we got that done. The script itself. I think
we like could jump to scenes at the end. Yeah, there was a bunch of stuff that came in at the last minute.
Okay.
I think there was a text document with all just kind of listed out.
Yeah, yeah. So those were some of the things we tried, and so this is really actually. I'm so glad that you asked this question, Dylan, because it is a really great segue to some work that Owen has been doing. And I'm going to move us on to the next section, but we're going to have time to come back to these related issues because I'm just so fascinating and I really appreciate the conversation. But let's go on to the next part of the section, or part of the session here. And Owen, do you want to kind of take it over and talk about accessibility from your perspective?
Sure, that was a perfect segue. So thank you. And yes, I've had the privilege to get a taste of the Sakhara project. I just want to, since you're all here, tell you as an outsider, it's truly amazing. And what I'm going to share here in a minute relates specifically to the questions around accessibility. And I just want to emphasize that these are the results of some experiments we've been doing behind the scenes. And in fact, this little demo, if you can see my screen now, hopefully, this is really created specifically almost for this event. This isn't something we're necessarily sharing publicly, but Chris was kind enough to give me some access to the Sakhara project. And as Chrissy said, it's really valuable to have an actual base project to work from whenever you're trying out these sorts of things. But just to step back and give you some context, as part of our community practice, one of our core values is accessibility, and that fits in general with how we approach research, teaching and learning at Berkeley. Particularly the teaching and learning side, we have a lot of experience being concerned and very intentional about making the learning environments and the content accessible to a wide range of students. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the landscape right now of accessibility with VR and AR. And but I thought it'd be good to just jump in with a quick demo of a very specific kind of set of a solution set that was developed by Microsoft Research. And so in this case, if you can imagine someone with a vision disability or one of a number of vision limitations trying to experience the Saqqara VR project, I'll show you just quickly, and I'll sort of narrate as we go, some tools that might help someone as they were working through this, but maybe they had limited vision. And let me just stop there for a second. This is quite simple. You'll notice almost like laser pointers there that someone could use to point around the inside of the tomb at different objects. And as you saw, when the pointer hit, for instance, the wall or the sarcophagus, an automated voice read out a description. The implementation here is incredibly simple, and it's analogous to what we're doing nowadays on the web, hopefully for images and graphs and things like that, that we call alt tags, where if you have a graphic, a visual, you try to provide some descriptive text behind the scenes. And we can talk more in a minute about how easy that is to do in VR, in particular in Unity. But let me just show another example as we see a text-to-speech from the display.
And Owen, let me mention, we could only just barely hear that, but I could just hear some audio. I don't know if there's a way for you to turn up your audio that's sharing.
Yeah, well, I will provide a link for this later. This is the only audio in here, this one and the next one.
All right.
Column 1, words to be said by MZ. I will be your protection.
And as you'll see in a minute, again, that's literally reading some text that happens to be part of the project display. This one's quite interesting. It's almost like having an enormous magnifying glass available to the user. But that glass has adjustable magnification. And again, this tool set is directed towards people with vision disabilities. There's quite a spectrum of vision disability. And so the researchers in Microsoft looked across some of the major categories and thought through what someone might use. And so here you can see how you get an almost unnatural ability to magnify in the VR environment. There's this zoom telescope effect that's very powerful and adjustable in the moment. So someone could, without moving close or putting their face up to something, actually get a really good view of it. You'll see that again here in a second as almost a telescopic range on the beautiful sarcophagus cover, where again, you can get an uncanny level of resolution as they zoom in. And this tool, like all the tools, can be turned on and off as the person's moving around. And then you'll see in a second, this is sort of the full view mode, but they also did a kind of what the equivalent of a bifocal version, where now the view is split and the person can kind of tip their head up to add the magnification into their view. Again, very simple, but surprisingly effective. This one's particularly cool. The group that did this is borrowing here from a lot of the work in computer vision, where there are so many useful algorithms around nowadays for doing edge detection and edge enhancement. This is the kind of stuff, you know, the automated cars are doing as they fly down the road to know where they are. But they've added here in the hopes of helping users make sense of the space they're in. And this edge enhancement can be adjusted in thickness and even in color. And it's kind of, you can kind of see the benefit of it in this tomb where a lot of the color and gradation is equivalent across the whole scene. But it allows someone to know that there are those vestibules there and there's a door, and start to see that the sarcophagus is sunken in. We'll see this same effect in a minute in the last tool in another very clever way. And of course, you know, in the same way that you can do contrast and brightness adjustment for digital photography, they have a tool there. In the moment, someone can be adjusting the view to accommodate their particular vision requirements. This one's really neat. For people who have peripheral vision limitations, they might almost have a tunnel vision effect as they move through a scene. And so here you see the edge enhancement has been scaled down to give the viewer some visual cues about what's around them. I particularly like this because you can know that there's an arch there and a vaulted ceiling in your periphery. And again, it's pretty lightweight as a tool. It's creating this in the moment. So wherever you look, it can be turned on and off. And as with edge enhancement, you know, you can adjust the colors or the thickness of the lines to suit your fancy. Okay. And I think that's it. And then I just have a couple quick slides I wanted to share so that we can, I can orient you towards some of the other work we've done in this area. Let me pull up the slide deck. Oops. Whoops, I'm sorry. There we go. Let me just present these. So that particular toolkit I just mentioned is described in much greater detail on a resource page that we've set up for the, particularly as we were creating this community of practice. And you can get all the details on the group and the tool and sort of the background on it. That tool, by the way, is freely available. The source code's available on GitHub. I would say that the amazing research group at Microsoft that created this really created it as a proof of concept. It's just out there. They're not actively maintaining it, but what's delightful is to see that their implementation, and this, I just showed you, I think 6 functions of more than almost 20, but their implementations really didn't involve any incredible invention of technology. They were tapping into existing functionality, for instance, in Unity, the ability to do ray casting and depth perception. Even the magnifying glass is just a very common feature of adding a camera. You know, most of your video games will have a bird's eye view of the scene that you're running through. So they didn't actually go out of their way to invent something super special. I think what they did was combine their expertise and accessibility and their research and ethnography in that area and create a wonderful proof of concept toolkit. So you can learn more about seeing VR. And then also, I don't think we've mentioned yet, we do have a page for this community of practice that's on the RTL site, and we'll send these links around. And from that, we have a link particularly to resources just about accessibility, where we're starting to gather up what we're seeing. And I just want to add that it's really encouraging to see just how much work and innovation is already going into this area, not just for vision, but for, you know, auditory, people with auditory limitations, speech. You know, a lot of these new environments and involves social interaction and speech. So there's work on accommodating people with speech disabilities, motor disabilities, of course. You know, not everyone can move around with the off-the-shelf controllers the way the sort of so-called normal person can. And finally, even cognitive disabilities. And so if you visit this site, you'll get a little sense of some of that work that's going on. And I threw this slide in here and hope that Dylan might be able to attend today. And our colleague, if he's still with us on the call, is Dylan Fox. He's a UC Berkeley alum, but he's also one of the organizers of an international group called XR Access. And Dylan was the one who asked a very good question earlier on, and is now working on campus. So what a wonderful resource to have potentially joining our community of practice. And are you still there, Dylan?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't want to take over the the presentation, but I'd be happy to talk a little bit about what we're doing in XR Access.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and this was my last slide. I did want to open this up to get reactions and see if there's a conversation to have here.
Sure. I mean, I would just kick it off just by first, just really quickly. So XR Access is, as we were just saying, a international community, a nonprofit organization dedicated to making, XR accessible to people with disabilities. And so, we've been working on essentially ways to implement accessibility and also making sure that we have a space where we can get feedback from people with disabilities. We can have stakeholders from, companies like Unity, like Facebook and Microsoft, and also from, academic users and creators like the people on this call. And so I'd definitely be interested in hearing a little bit more from them about, for example, with captions, what are some of the barriers that you ran into? Because it definitely sounds like, to your credit, you thought about it, you tried to do it, and it just was not at all something. I think it's something we've gotten a lot, is that even where the will is there, sometimes there's just not the kind of infrastructure in place to support it. And ideally, you look at something like YouTube, where they have a number of pretty easy ways to put in captions. VR does not have that yet. And so I'd be curious to have a little bit of conversation around that, around kind of what you tried, what the challenges were you ran into, any feedback you got from the people you tested it out with, and yeah, what types of resources might be valuable to you for accessibility on future projects.
Go ahead, Christy.
So from my perspective, I would say that pretty much everything that we have, we were building from the ground up and pulling together different bits of code that did what we needed. Having an existing plugin that could provide some sort of usable interface would have been super helpful. We just had so much in that base project that we needed to nail down first, that it was very much a resource issue, that we just didn't have enough people to throw at the problem. And Reed, maybe correct me if there's something that I got slightly wrong there, but I think that's where our barrier was just how many people we could have to help build this out, and not being able to find existing Unity things to meet those needs.
Yeah, go ahead, Reed.
Yeah, I totally agree with Christy on that. We had some ideas for how I wanted to do the subtitles for the captions. But one of the main issues we really had that could have been helpful to have something similar to the overlay you had for the like spatial awareness for like stuff out of your field of view would have been some kind of text overlay, because that was one of the main problems we had when it came to captions. And that's why I'm pretty sure there are no captions inside the tomb. So the captions we do have in the project are only for the landscape, where there's a panel to the left. We made a lot of cuts, so it just has the entire block text of what Elaine is saying for that position. Then it will go to the next one. But inside the tomb, one of the main problems we faced with the captions is just, where do you put this? Because It was challenging to find a good way to do like text that followed along with the user's head that was comfortable and worked for different people. So yeah, that's kind of a lot of the issues we ran into that would have been helpful to have some kind of like SDK or something for accessibility.
Yeah, and just the notion of like the standards, like what is kind of a best practice in terms of, making something visible, making something that's easy to turn on and off. Like what are the appropriate, kind of gestures to do that in VR? We experimented. We thought like, oh, kind of having a ticker tape down at the bottom that scrolled along with the speaker, but should that be in kind of quote unquote real world space or fixed? So like, what if the person in the experience turned away? Do we want that to come float with them, with their field of view as they turn their head? There were just all these issues we didn't know how to handle. And one of the things I was just wondering about was, because our campus accessibility kind of expert and champion is a woman named Lucy Greco, and I'm sure what she would be saying right now is like, well, if you were required to do it like you should be, then you would have done it. You would have put the resources on it instead of making it she would say, she's very critical. She would say, instead of making it a lower priority or an afterthought, you would have built in the time to do it. Right, Chris? I'm like, yes, Lucy, you're right. So, and as we know with online teaching now, we have to have captions. So we make the resources available. The tools get developed. So the day will come, right? The day will come where that will be required.
Yeah, and I think ideally this is not something that you should have to reinvent the wheel on, right? If Unity comes with all of these resources for VR in terms of controller models and interactions and all this and that, we want to get to the point where captions are another part of that default kit that ships with every version of Unity, and it becomes obvious. It's part of the tutorials, like, oh, and by the way, to add captions, do X, instead of something that you have to try to cobble together from scratch. And part of that is just solving some of these technical problems. Part of it is solving the user requirement problems. I'm part of the W3C immersive captions group, and it turns out that when you have captions in XR, and especially captions in XR where there are multiple sources within the scene. The example we've been using is a 360 video of a comedy club, and you'll have somebody talking over here and then somebody talking over here, and the conversation will jump around. And there's a really challenging, UX problem there of, okay, well, if you just play the captions over the person's head, well, how does somebody know there's a caption over there? Oh, we'll put an arrow there. Okay, well, by the time you turn around and look, they're done speaking and the caption goes away. And so that's something that we're certainly working on with a lot of really smart folks, and we'll be releasing as soon as we can. And then hopefully pretty soon after that, working with again groups like Unity to make it easier to actually implement captions. So I think right now we are kind of unfortunately in a state where people have to cobble it together a bit. I think the idea of having, kind of low-hanging fruit versions of things like, have a button that brings up the transcript, right? That's something that's much easier to implement, and still gets you a part of the way there, right? I think trying to find those types of simple solutions, it can be definitely part of the MVP where we can.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be curious as well to hear. I know one of the other things that was mentioned was asking people to kind of like, crawl under things to get to like new parts of the tomb. I'd be curious if there were any mobility challenges there, or other types of movement interfaces that you thought about for that.
It was more about during our testing, people just naturally, most people naturally just tried to. They tried to get low so they could peer at things that were kind of low. But as Jess was saying in the video, they didn't realize they could also turn around and look behind them until you prompted them. I had early on an experience when we did our testing where a woman wanted to sit down. She's like, I just know that I can't do this standing up, so I need to sit down. I was like, oh, okay, so let's see how that works. And are you able to turn around on this seat and see behind you? And from that seated position, can you see the things that we wanted you to see? It was really interesting. It worked okay, but I would say we weren't probably optimally designed for that kind of experience. I see Reed's hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to very quickly chime in about the crawling experience kind of thing. The best solution we had to that was changing the design of where the user started for the inside of the tombstone, because originally they started on the other side of that and they'd have to teleport in, and then they'd be standing up or in their chair, which would adjust for the height, and their head would be in the ceiling, which just wouldn't work at all. So we didn't really want to force that on the user, so we decided to just start them inside and leave that little corridor to be more optional and a visual thing. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you very much. Really great discussion. Go ahead, Dylan.
I was just gonna say another thing, another great resource is the Locomotion Vault, which is, I'll go ahead and grab a link to it here. It's research from a couple of different folks that they've basically put together every single possible way anyone has thought of to move in VR. So you have teleporting, you'll have just touch to move, you'll have sliding the joystick around, but you'll have things kind of as wild as like head bowling, where you pluck off your head and throw it to the space you want to go to, right? Like every piece of that anybody's come up with, and they've tagged them with things like accessibility, number of controllers required, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's another resource I would certainly point people to, because oftentimes for accessibility, the key thing is just not picking any one interface, but having multiple interfaces that can accommodate people with different kinds of disabilities.
Great. So I tell you what, let's move on to the next section, and we will almost certainly come back to this when we have kind of general discussion, but really fascinating conversation. Thank you to everyone. I think that was really enlightening and just shows how important this is, and how many, I think one of the things that I see from this, and that I think we see in general with accessibility, is that these technologies help everybody, right? They're not just of benefit to people who have different kinds of abilities. Being able to zoom in on things or see the edges enhanced, that really helps all of us. I think that's in general what we're seeing with accessibility technology. So it's an exciting area for us to be thinking about. And we're very fortunate to have some real local expertise with Owen and Dylan. It's really, really wonderful. Okay, so in the next section of today's event, we're going to demonstrate some other work. Owen showed the work he's been doing with Seeing VR, and our team has also been doing some simple development to look at things like, well, what are we able to take some of these digital assets from the Saqqara VR Return to the Tomb experience and bring them into an augmented reality application. So I'm going to, and in general, it made me realize, well, actually, we've been doing this in other contexts too. So I'm going to show another YouTube video that kind of demonstrates some of this work, and I'll try to kind of narrate over the top of it, but otherwise you'll just see the different kind of aspects of this work that we've been doing actually now for a couple of years. Let me go to my desktop, sharing my sound. Here we are. And okay, I'm going to go ahead. So on the web, Saqqara XR on the web. So we've actually been providing access to some of the sarcophagi model and others on websites, actually starting with Rita Lucarelli's 3D Coffins website. So this is a just a simple demonstration of how that website works. You know, Rita has really encouraged you to visit the site, 3dcoffins.berkeley.edu. You can read all these references and descriptions of the sarcophagus. And then she's embedded some work that her colleague, and I always get his name wrong, Rita, it's Jean-Marc van Nederhoff, I believe.
Yes.
Okay, great. And you can see he's helped build with Rita, you know, we're in collaboration with Rita, this wonderful site that allows you to see the model, but then also, you know, navigate to different parts of the inscriptions from the Book of the Dead. And it's broken down by text in terms of its position on the sarcophagus, in terms of actually specific vocabulary items that you can click on and navigate to, and then, or even you know, person's names. And then there's some background information here as well. And you've got the ability to zoom and pan and you know, spin the 3D model here, get up to the very high resolution digital asset. Now, another place we've made that 3D model available is on the collection space portal for the Hearst Museum. And it, again, includes metadata as well as images and even the original ledger cards from this collection item, and then the 3D model that we've embedded into the website. And again, you can do the simple kind of zoom in, zoom out, and turn so that you can, you know, look at specific even items here. And it's a fairly high resolution model. Then we've also installed visualization walls in a couple of the different campus museums. This is from the Hearst Museum of Anthropology, where we did a lot of our photogrammetry work. I didn't have any pictures of the doctor there, but in the Citrus Cave, which is in the Citrus Tech Museum in Saqqara Hall, Rita, let me just pause this because it's going very fast. Rita did a presentation because Citrus, I should have said thanks to this Citrus because they helped fund this project. I unfortunately left them out of my acknowledgements. But Rita gave a presentation up there and also demonstrated, you know, some of these digital assets in the context of the Citrus Tech Museum, where we installed one of these visualization walls. Hopefully, when we return from the pandemic, we'll actually be able to, you know, see these things in person again. So that was the Citrus Tech Museum. This is the doctor there looking over Rita's shoulder. And then I did some work, some experiments to see if we could develop augmented reality versions of these applications by taking some of the digital assets and using some Unity templates for augmented reality applications. So here's one that is deployed on an iPad. It uses Unity and Apple's ARKit technology. And this is just a kind of a screen grab from my iPad. I'm out in my backyard. The application has drawn and going too fast. It drew a plane, and then I clicked on the screen, and it placed the 3D model of the tomb itself. So this is the upper and lower tomb that the sarcophagus is kind of stored in, and you'll see more of that coming up in a second. So again, what I did here is I just used an existing template that was built for a, I think it was a 3D model of like a turbo jet engine. And you could do things like, you know, hide some of the different parts or move them around to get to the different, you know, views of a jet engine. And so I threw those away and I brought in some of the digital assets that we had used in the Sakhara experience. So I'll click play again here to see. So we're looking at the tomb. I'm able to hide some of the different parts of the tomb itself. And now we can see the doctor. There's different settings so that I can turn off different functions. I'm going to pause for a second. Here's what's not working. And I'd be very interested if any of the others in the room have any understanding of this. Theoretically, the sarcophagus, the top here, the doctor, should stay physically put where it is in my backyard, right? However, you'll see as I try to walk towards it, it's going to float away from me, like it doesn't like me or something. but actually it's just not fixed correctly in space. Because here I am walking to it, and you can see that the 3D model is moving away until I get close enough. And now I'm able to look at it, and I can now click on different parts of the sarcophagus itself and bring up some translation panels. So I worked on this to build in some interactive capabilities. So you can see I've clicked on the right panel here, and thank you, Bala. It seems to be a limitation on the tracking itself. I agree. And we have the original hieroglyphics and their translations that I just copied and pasted from the other Unity application. And so I'm just demonstrating that I can click on the different panels and bring them up. Now here you can see I'm going to click on the main panel, the big middle panel, and you can see I've tried to basically shove all of those inscriptions and all of that text into one kind of translation panel here. It's kind of ugly, but it does work. Clicking again here. So then just demonstrating that you can drill in kind of close here to actually see the inscriptions up fairly close. Then the other thing that was part of the template for the for this Unity experience was that you could actually then bring the parts back in. So I said show all and have brought in the other parts of the sarcophagus. I see a couple comments here in chat. Right, so Vala, this could be a limitation on the tracking itself. Yes, I think the underlying plane is actually moving around. Let's come back to some of these points when we have some general discussion. Dylan says, I think it needs more reference points in the environment. That could also be a problem with using it outside. So it's actually worse on the inside somehow. Pablo's, what is the main anchor object? Right, good question. And no, this is not an iPad Pro. And so it could be like the ones with the LiDAR cameras might work better, right? So I've been trying to decide whether to drop some money for an iPad Pro with the LiDAR camera and see if that works better. Oh, Bala, you may have just given me the excuse to go do that for myself. Okay, so let's move on and we'll come back to some of this discussion. It definitely works better, excellent. Okay, so then there's another demo here. All right, so then thanks to the Changemaker project, we also have a couple of HoloLens units. And again, I took a Unity template project, just a learner project with using the mixed reality toolkit to see if I could bring the doctor into a HoloLens project. So HoloLens is another augmented reality device that's used for kind of high-end, really it's kind of targeted to businesses that are doing trainings and support for repairing those jet engines. And I took a similar kind of template and threw away the digital assets, which I think was a Mars rover or something like that, and brought in the doctor. So let's take a look at that. This one has a little bit of sound. So here I am in my kitchen. I did not record the sound. That's right. It's visualizing the space in my kitchen, advertising Unity. Okay, and there we have, the sarcophagus of Somtech there in my kitchen, sitting on a plane. And you can see there we are in AR. There's someone from my household walking by. There's different features. I did not have time to build in some of the interactivity of like showing the translation panels, etc. But you can see this is kind of nice. You can get pretty close. Okay, so I am going to stop share there and bring us back. So that was just a few kind of some experiments that we've been doing in AR and what we've done in the past with these digital assets. So questions or observations? Again, thank you for people's comments and suggestions. I see Justin has had to run to another meeting, but was very thankful and For those of you who don't know, Justin is the director of the visualization lab in the Department of Art History on campus, and a very well-known kind of practitioner in this space. So he's a really important part of our community. Dylan has asked, do you have an idea what use cases the AR versus VR would be used? Museums were mentioned before. So that's, I think museums are definitely an interesting example where, you know, and I know, for instance, in the Hearst Museum, they've used some, you know, kind of just some of the apps that are just out there in the app space to build some AR experiences based on, Rita, do you remember the name of the, I think it's a stele that has some hieroglyphics on it that they've done some work with?
Yes, you mean in Harvard?
No, in the Hearst Museum, actually, there's one one panel
sorry,
that they've done some.
Yeah, it's a stela that is I think also now in the galleries.
Oh yeah,
the
that's
fifth
right.
dynasty. Wepem Nofret is called, but anyway, it's a very famous piece that we found in Egypt, and there is some work done on it. But Peter Dermanuelian, the professor of Egyptology in Harvard, developed a very interesting app with augmented reality for a stela whose copy is now in Harvard, and I can send you the link for you guys, because I think Ellen knows as well that project is very useful. And speaking about spaces where this could be useful to use, I would say the classroom. I think our students of Egyptologists will be super excited to suddenly have the sarcophagus lid in class on the desk.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the one at Harvard is the Sphinx stela. And so they have the code on the floor, and you can borrow an iPad. And so you can read the text, and then a visualization of the Sphinx itself reconstructed with its original color is the augmented reality that shows up in front of the object. So it's a sort of recontextualization kind of thing in a way that's parallel to what Rita and I have been doing.
Yeah, and I shared the link if you guys want to try it out. It worked really well.
Thank you. I put in a link to something on the Harvard site that has a video and more information about that as well. Excellent. Well, that's exciting.
Yes.
Yeah, well, go ahead.
Chris, I have a question about what you experimented. That was really great. So I wonder if you're aware that what you took out of our app wasn't the full tomb, but was actually the outer sarcophagus, and then our sarcophagus lid, right? Would it be possible even to do that with the old tomb, like having really the old tomb in another setting, you think?
I do think so. In fact, yes, that's absolutely correct. I said tomb, but we were really, when you were in my backyard
like
there,
a
that
tomb,
was
but
it's really just the outer coffin for the inner coffin, right? Because these are layered containers, right? Yes, I did. You know, I would love to do that as a kind of a next version. Like, what would it like if you wanted to have the whole tomb that the outer coffin, inner coffin are in?
Keeping in mind that was an it's a tomb underground, so there is a shaft and the tomb is underground. And I wonder, for you guys, all experts, do you think this is something that we could use with an augmented reality? Just curious.
Yeah, great question. I wonder that too. To get like part of this project was the goal was to bring together the macro scale of the landscape and the micro scale of the sarcophagus and its inscriptions and everything in between. That works pretty well in VR. How well would it work in an augmented reality application? Is anybody seeing anything that does anything like that?
I'm talking about kind of scale of large versus small on AR versus VR.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've found that one of the big limitations right now of AR is the limited field of view, right? If there's anything big, if you're trying to do like a Jurassic Park type thing with dinosaurs, right? There's it's very hard to get that cinematic feel of like looking from kind of the bottom to the top and having this massive object, because you're only seeing a little bit of it in the center of your vision at any time. In compared to VR, where it can really fill your field of view, AR, you generally try to stick towards having smaller things, or things where you have discrete objects that will fit within that, you know, on the either a phone screen, or if you're on the HoloLens, that like I think 40 to 50 degrees in the center of your vision, trying to fit that in. I think you also saw with a little bit of that with when you turn in the HoloLens, there's that the sarcophagus, but also the big kind of plane that went across it, trying to remove like those background elements and things in AR. Is one of those ways you can kind of fine tune something for AR versus VR. I'd also say I know for AR, we mentioned earlier the idea of being able to have AR having something will also be able to review something like a document at the same time, right? I would say the thing that comes to mind for talking about this and this kind of sarcophagi and whatnot is what would be an absolutely amazing AR experience for me is if I could go to a museum that actually has a physical sarcophagi there, and then augment it with like, oh, here's the hieroglyphs, here's the translation of those hieroglyphs, right? That would be amazing, because then you're taking something that's in real life and augmenting it with information rather than showing you a just digital version of something kind of floating in midair.
I totally agreed. And I'm really excited to continue that work in the museums to help them and to explore what those potentials are, because I really believe there's incredible potential there. And fortunately, we have really good partnerships with the Hearst Museum of Anthropology, MPFA, the Botanical Garden, the Herbaria. We have these incredibly rich resources that are just begging to tell stories, right? So this is almost an opportunity and an imperative from my perspective. We've got to find ways to do this. We have some great stuff coming into the chat. I think that that Luisa had to leave. She had a couple of links that she put in and asked some questions about, like, can this work in a web-based context as well as on the PC? And that's a great question, a good example. She, Elnaz, maybe you could put in chat a link to the recent kind of museum exhibit in the Worcester Hall.
Yes, I'm going to put the link to download the project if anyone is interested.
They have a wonderful web-based exhibit. Do you want to say a little bit about that, actually, Elnaz? Because it's really fascinating.
So there's construction happening. Things might get loud suddenly, but basically we have been working on a virtual Worcester Hall experience that students can actually join. They will have avatars and they can upload their design projects basically inside the studio space. It's getting loud here, but I'm going to upload the link for you to download both the exhibition that we collaborated with Diana, who was like a fellow at CD, and also I would upload to the general project.
Great. Thank you. And Owen, I see a link from you about a Museum Next link. What is that? Can you mention what that is?
Kind of I hope in our remaining time, that was just one example, sort of a meta conversation about future topics and maybe even future meeting patterns. It seems like this has been a valuable meeting today. And if we have time before folks need to leave, be great. And I think we could survey people later to see what are some topics we could reconvene around in the coming year. And so that was just one example of that. I think you and I, Chris, have seen that there's a lot of activity going on in AR, but even particularly with HoloLens in museums, where museum visitors are actually donning HoloLenses and having enhanced experiences. But the larger point was kind of the meta conversation about our little community of practice and what people would like to see in the coming year.
Great, excellent. So let's just kind of evolve into kind of that general discussion, because there's a lot of great ideas. Thank you everybody for putting your thoughts and your examples and links into chat. There's clearly a lot of interest in what we can do in some of these museum contexts, and bringing together AR experiences where they're appropriate, VR experiences where they're appropriate. And yeah, I do encourage people, once the College of Environmental Design's web pages are back up, please go take a look at that. It's not only is it an interesting technology, but more importantly, it's a great exhibit of some important topics. So I really applaud the team that developed that. It's really neat. So Bala, you've made a point here. One of the other things that could be explored, the tools for collaboration on these physical artifacts that leverage the digital affordances provided by AR. You say a little bit more about that? I'd be interested to hear what you're talking about there.
Yeah, so consider the case of the sarcophagus, right? So there are some things that you might want to note on the sarcophagus itself. Right? So we have mostly talked about how we can use photogrammetry to scan physical artifacts. But more often than not, people also discuss regarding, say, maybe a symbol on the sarcophagus, right? And what is currently being done is you take a picture and then you kind of circle things on a picture and do it. But when you have something like a 3D scan of it, then you can just mark on it and annotate or do some annotations or discussions on that, right? And what is currently missing is, okay, so now say if there are multiple people on the site, you could actually leverage augmented reality, or you could leverage the tools provided by augmented reality to do something like, so you are on site and you want to know, or you are discussing some symbol on the sarcophagus, right? You can, if both of you are equipped with AR, or even if one of you is equipped with AR, you can quickly pull up that information that relates to a particular entity on a physical artifact, particular maybe information on a physical artifact, which otherwise you have to scroll through documents and pages. So AR provides a way to quickly or link any digital information with a particular physical artifact, and even more precisely, a particular section of a physical artifact. So and that's only becoming reliably possible in the last couple of years. So there's more exploration that could happen there, I feel. And one of the other things is, especially when we are in a sort of a work from home era, is there any way you can use augmented reality to co-work with some other folk who is not on site, right? So you are in front of a sarcophagus, but what if someone who's not on that side, can they also be part of the discussion, or can they meaningfully contribute to the discussion? And there are, AR can do that, and there has been a lot of work in the research literature that has explored this, but nothing that has evolved into actual practice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's primarily because the technology to facilitate this were not there till now, and it's currently there, and maybe something that we should start looking into.
Completely agree. Okay, so yeah, I completely agree. Something I have not had a chance to explore in my limited dabbling experiments is the social AR and social XR has really emerged as being something that's feasible. And whether, like you say, whether it's your multiple people in a shared space or in different spaces, being able to at the same time interact with, annotate, talk about, and discuss, what this, an object, and annotations or observations that professional scholars who spent a lifetime understanding and explaining these objects, that is really exciting. And I think especially, I think Owen brought up, kind of as we think about some of the kind of instructional opportunities that these technologies can afford to us in the future. This is definitely something to explore.
So in the context of augmented reality collaboration, so we explored this like back in 2019, like a couple of years ago, where we needed like multiple Kinect cameras on site to transmit all the data. So the idea is that one person can just annotate on their actual physical space. Say you want to point out to something on the sarcophagus here, right? So we provide you with a controller in which it's a track space. You can draw digital annotations on a physical space, and the person on the other end, the remote end, they see your digital annotation on a reconstructed mesh of the live mesh of the physical space, right? And that took a lot of bandwidth. It took a lot of equipment, and like that was something we did as like, hey, here are interesting interactions that are possible. So I sent a link to that video on the chat. But with the advent of these good LiDAR sensors, right? You don't need these expensive Kinects anymore. You don't need technologies. You don't need to be bound to a laboratory space. You're more like, it's much more easier to just do everything on an iPad these days. Right? And the quality of these reconstructions provided by these LiDAR cameras are not bad.
Interesting.
They're pretty good.
That reminds me, some of the other work that Alex and Owen and I have been doing is experimenting with some of the social XR environments, the alt space and spatial, and even Microsoft's HoloLens-based mesh. And that's been really interesting. And I don't know how many people have actually had a chance to use one of these, but we could go into an environment and like Owen and I would both be on our HoloLens devices, and Alex would be on an Oculus Quest or on her computer, and we could all be in the same space. And Alex brought in some digital models from the Saqqara experience, and we could all sit and kind of talk about those. Like, oh yeah, that one's scaled down to about half size. What happens when we blow it up? Wow, oh, it's really big at full size. So the social XR environments are really getting quite a bit more mature. I wonder if other people here have had opportunity to experience, whether it's alt space or spatial, or Facebook is coming out with a new one. And
so my take on social XR is it's been around for a while. It's definitely been around for a while, and it's cool. It's really cool. It's fun. For the first week, right? And after that, there's not really anything you do that, right? Like you need to have a purpose, and people find purpose for the social things either because they are bored or there is some nice game that you can play there, right? But very few of the social spaces have been tested for the use case of productivity or education. There are some nice examples out there, and that's, so here's a question that I try to ask. If I'm meeting someone in person, would I still use this tool to make my meeting more productive? If yes, then I've succeeded in creating a really good social XR application. If not, then it's just a hype. Like so a classic example is say GitHub. So for those who code, right? So GitHub provides a way to merge or combine or pair program it allows two people to program the same code at the same time and then merge it each other. So even if my collaborator is sitting next to me, we would still collaborate, work over GitHub, or a classic example is Google Docs, right? If we want to edit the same sheet at the same time, we use a software that helps us to collaborate. So in case of a discussion with a physical artifact, even if I'm in person, would I still use that AR or VR tool to collaborate? If yes, then that's a really good tool. Most of the social tools, they try to compensate for the lack of in-person interaction, but they don't do justice to that. Yeah, I don't know if Chris is still on call.
Yeah, I was wondering the same, and Chris.
Oh, he might have had to drop off. I know he's expecting some calls, so let me just keep the conversation going. Yeah, thank you, Bala. That is a good litmus test. I would say that, kind of to your point, what goal is it being used for? I think Altspace is one of the oldest and more mature of these social media sites, and I haven't spent a lot of time on the social side, but I have seen it being used for teaching, instruction. And what's particularly Altspace, by the way, is owned by Microsoft, and they've been investing in it. And it does have a lot of facility for people to do what they call world building. And so you can build environments in Unity and upload them, and those become full-scale realms within Altspace, through which lots and lots of participants can meet, gather, roam. And so again, this could be an interesting topic area. There are 4 or 5 major spaces, and probably new ones coming along all the time. And I think Bala has kind of outlined the critical dimensions there of how it's being used, what it's trying to replicate, and when it's kind of overkill or not useful. As Chris and I and Alex have done some experiments in these different spaces, it's true in all of them that the artifacts that you bring in from whatever you've already created in Unity do have to be pared down in certain ways, in resolution and size. But I have seen some pretty impressive demos, and again, this, I think I will talk to Chris about this later, and Alex. I think we might want to survey some of you to see if you have some thoughts about future meeting topics, and I could easily see us dedicating a meeting just to giving some tours and having some conversations about these sites. A lot of them, for instance, Altspace, Spatial, and others don't require that the users have AR or VR headsets to participate. So they sort of have a baseline default where anyone can participate via a web browser. Or sort of the next level in is just a simple Zoom connection. But then the better environments accommodate whatever device you might also have as well. And from my perspective, I'm delighted to see that several of these environments are working very intentionally on accessibility. And so Dylan mentioned earlier, what does it mean to have captions when you're in a crowded environment where people talking and maybe somebody's presenting on a stage? And that's something that Altspace has been wrestling with, and they've been rolling out some different solutions there. So I'll stop there, but if that seems like it could be an interesting meeting topic, maybe we'll put that on as a survey item, and we can get your thoughts about reconvening again over the coming year and exploring some of these topics in more depth.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. So yeah, I think we're pretty close to at time, but I want to make sure that if anybody has kind of other questions or observations, that would be great to hear. I do think this has been a great time, and there's a lot to follow up here, a lot of great potential things that we could do together.
Yeah, I just want to take a moment to give a shout out first to the team for the efforts that you did, the thought you did put into accessibility, and then second, just for anybody who's interested more in that topic, definitely check out XR Access. We have our annual symposium is on June 10th. I'll put a link to that in the description here, but we are going to have a big day just kind of talking about all kinds of topics like that. And then we also have a community where people can bring problems like this and hopefully discuss them and get some resolution. So definitely check that out, and we'd certainly love to have more participation from researchers in those communities.
Great, thank you, Dylan. So I really want to just, in closing, thank the project team who developed the Return to the Tomb experience, especially Rita and Elaine, but the whole team. And to Owen and Alex for helping put together this event also. Thank you so much. Everybody who joined us today, thank you. We'll be sharing the recording and some of the, take a look through the chat and maybe share some of that as notes, because there's some great resources in there. And as Owen said, we'll follow up with either through a survey or other invitations to some future opportunities to get together and talk and think about collaboration. So everyone, have a great day. Thank you for spending your Monday afternoon with us, and see you in the future.
Thank you, Chris, and everyone.
Bye all. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris and Owen, putting this together. Excellent presentation.
Okay.
Bye.